The late afternoon sun painted the suburban cul-de-sac in golden streaks. It was one of those peaceful days where nothing really happened, and that was exactly how Marcus liked it. He was tucked inside his modest two-story home, a cup of coffee steaming beside his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as he prepared for the final pitch in a week-long remote tech conference. Marcus had worked for months on this project, debugging, late-night testing, fixing things that weren't broken just because someone above him thought they were. Now, finally, he was minutes away from showing off his team's work to a major client. He glanced at the clock. 3:58 p.m. 2 minutes until go time. He adjusted his collar, checked his mic, muted the barking dog across the street, and clicked into the video call. His screen flickered for a second before the faces of executives from all over the country popped up in a neat grid. Polished smiles, power suits, a few unreadable expressions. Marcus gave a small nod. "Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate your time today," he began, keeping his voice calm but confident. "Let me walk you through how our system optimizes data caching." Click. The screen froze. Not a hiccup. Not a brief pause. Frozen, like a paused movie with Marcus's mouth wide open mid-sentence. His cursor wouldn't move. The video didn't catch up. "Don't do this to me," he muttered, already reaching for the router behind his desk. His stomach dropped. No blinking lights. No signal. He tapped his modem. Dead. Wi-Fi, gone. He jogged to the kitchen window and scanned the street. His neighbors seemed fine. The Johnson's fountain was still burbling. The Smith's flag was still spinning on its motor. So why just him? With a resigned groan, he grabbed his phone and turned off Wi-Fi. Nothing loaded. He had no cell signal either, which was rare but not impossible for his spot. He relied on Wi-Fi calling most of the time. He leaned against the counter and exhaled through his nose, staring at nothing for a few seconds. Outside, across the street, a figure stood by the edge of her driveway. Karen. Her real name was Sharon, but in the few months since Marcus moved into this neighborhood, he'd learned that she preferred to go by Sharon, with 2 R's, like sharp. Still, everyone, casually, not unkindly, referred to her as Karen, mostly because she seemed determined to fulfill the role. Early on, she'd warned Marcus about keeping his trash cans within regulation, even though he hadn't moved in yet. She was always patrolling the neighborhood in mismatched tracksuits and walking a dog that clearly didn't belong to her. Now, Karen was staring across the street at him with a look that didn't say, "Nice to see you," but more like, "I knew it." Marcus stepped outside, walking down his porch steps with caution, not in the mood to invite drama. "Evening," he offered, trying to keep it neutral. Karen crossed her arms, her oversized sunglasses reflecting his house like it was under investigation. "Funny," she said, her tone already laced with accusation. "Ever since you installed that boxy thing on your back porch, my internet's been acting funny." Marcus blinked. "You mean the mesh router? That's so I can take video calls from my shed." Karen raised a brow like he'd just spoken Latin. "I don't care what fancy tech name it's got. My Netflix is buffering, and you moved in right before it started. Coincidence?" "It probably is," he said, trying not to laugh. "I'm pretty sure my $70 a month internet plan isn't intercepting yours." Karen took a step closer to the edge of his lawn. "I've lived here for 12 years. Never had a problem until now. You're putting up all kinds of equipment. You got cables running in the back, blinking lights. Makes you wonder." Marcus stared. "You think I'm, what? Stealing your internet?" She didn't blink. "Not saying that. But I wouldn't rule it out." He sighed. "Look, ma'am. It's Sharon. I'm not touching your internet. I work in IT. That router back there? It's for my own job. The only thing I've ever done to your house is wave when I see you outside. Karen tilted her chin up. Well, if something happens to my smart thermostat again, I know who to ask. Marcus turned and walked back inside, muttering to himself as he shut the door. He knew this wasn't over. Karen didn't believe in letting go. She'd once filed a complaint to the HOA about a neighbor's Christmas lights in October and left handwritten notes about proper mailbox decorum on 3 houses. She was the kind of person who saw difference as disruption. Back inside, Marcus called his internet provider. 20 minutes later, he got someone who said there was a physical disruption to the service line. They'd send someone the next day. Frustrated, Marcus spent the evening resetting his equipment, walking the perimeter of his house, and even checking the cable box outside. Everything looked intact, but something had clearly gone wrong. As night fell, he gave up and watched downloaded episodes of The Office on his tablet. The next morning, a utility truck arrived promptly at 9:15 a.m. Marcus greeted the technician, a gruff but kind man named Joel, who took one look at the coaxial line and shook his head. Looks like someone took scissors to this, Joel muttered, pointing to a jagged, frayed end of the main cable line. Clean cut, right through the junction. Amateur job. Marcus stared. You're saying someone cut the line on purpose? Joel shrugged. Could have been a squirrel with a vendetta, but more likely a person. This ain't no accident. They replaced the line, tested the system, and sure enough, the internet was back up. But the cut, the deliberate nature of it, lingered in Marcus's mind like a bad aftertaste. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but when he checked his security camera footage from the backyard, his suspicion hardened. The infrared caught something around 11:48 p.m. A human shape, creeping near the utility box. Short frame. Hoodie. A flashlight. And scissors. The quality wasn't great, and the person didn't face the camera directly. But the profile, the posture, Marcus had seen that same stiff-shouldered march many times before. He knew who it was. And while there wasn't crystal-clear evidence, his gut clenched with certainty. Still, he hesitated. What was the point in confronting her? If he was wrong, he'd look paranoid. If he was right, she'd just deny it. And Marcus wasn't looking for neighborhood drama. He just wanted peace. But peace, it seemed, had left the cul-de-sac. That evening, he caught Karen outside again, watering her flower beds like she hadn't tiptoed through his yard the night before. I heard you had some internet troubles, she said, not even bothering to mask the glee in her voice. Marcus kept his tone flat. Yeah, someone cut the cable. Karen blinked innocently. Oh dear. Who would do something like that? He held her gaze for a moment, not saying anything. She smiled. Marcus turned and walked away, his hands tight at his sides. He'd dealt with racism before, sometimes overt, often subtle. But something about this act, the pettiness, the cowardice, the quiet, sneaky sabotage, set a different kind of fire in him. It wasn't just about him. It was about what people like her thought they could get away with, and who they thought they could intimidate into silence. He didn't say a word that night. He just sat on his porch, watching her lights flicker off one by one, making a mental note to check the footage again in the morning. The game had begun and Karen didn't even know it yet. 2 days passed, and Marcus tried to shake off the unease that had settled in his chest. His internet was restored, his work calls were back on schedule, and his house was quiet again. But that late-night clip, the vague silhouette with a flashlight and scissors, kept replaying in his mind. It wasn't fear that lingered, it was frustration. Someone had stepped into his space, violated his privacy, and sabotaged him, whether out of ignorance or malice, he wasn't sure. Either way, it didn't sit right. Across the street, Karen went about her days as if nothing had happened. She waved too enthusiastically at delivery drivers, planted tulips in the front yard like she was auditioning for a gardening magazine, and gave Marcus forced smiles anytime he passed. If she noticed that he wasn't smiling back, she didn't let on. What Marcus didn't know was that Karen was convinced she was right. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that the blinking router lights in Marcus's window were somehow interfering with her Wi-Fi. Her daughter had complained about lag on her video calls. Her smart TV froze during a soap opera. Her husband, when he wasn't working late or golfing, mentioned the router acting weird. For Karen, that was enough evidence to form a full-blown theory. She didn't know how internet signals worked. But she knew Marcus had moved in just before everything went wrong. And in her world, patterns were proof. So, one quiet Thursday night, she made up her mind. Around 11:30 p.m., when the street had settled into that familiar suburban hush, porch lights dimmed, televisions off, dogs tucked in, Karen slipped out of her side door in a sweatshirt and soft-soled sneakers. She clutched a pair of shears in her gloved hand. They were meant for hedge trimming, but they looked sharp enough. She didn't want to hurt anyone, of course. She just wanted to cut the signal. Or at least the box she was convinced was the problem. She crept around the side of Marcus's house, hugging the edge of the fence, her flashlight low and shaky. She didn't notice the camera above the gutter, small, nondescript, but angled perfectly toward the utility box. She knelt down in front of the square gray panel mounted near the back corner. It had stickers and warnings: danger, high voltage, authorized personnel only. But she figured that was just for show. After all, she'd seen Marcus near it a few days earlier. If he could touch it, so could she. Karen squinted, opened the box, and scanned the tangle of cables and connectors inside. It was all foreign to her, but one thick black cable stood out. It looked newer, slightly shinier, and it trailed down toward the soil, running directly toward Marcus's home. She adjusted her grip on the shears, braced herself, and, without hesitation, snipped. A spark jumped. A sharp pop cracked through the night air. Karen jerked back, dropping the shears and scrambling up like a startled cat. Everything went black. Not just Marcus's house. The entire street. Lights off. Porch bulbs dimmed. Air conditioners stopped humming. A neighbor's garage door let out a half-strangled whine before locking mid-close. Somewhere down the street, a dog began barking wildly. Karen stood frozen. Her eyes wide, heart pounding. She turned in slow, jerky motions, scanning the darkness she had unleashed. The only light left was the faint red glow of a digital clock in a kitchen window across the street, blinking 12 o'clock, already reset. What the hell, she whispered to herself. She turned, half-tripped over the shears, picked them up, and bolted back through the hedges toward her backyard. But in her panic, she misjudged the distance and smacked her shin into a garden border. She hissed in pain, caught herself on a rose trellis, and limped the rest of the way home, leaving broken twigs and crushed flower petals in her wake. Inside Marcus's house, everything had shut off in an instant. His laptop went black. The lights died. The quiet hum of his air filter vanished. He sat in stunned silence for several seconds before standing up, phone flashlight already on, scanning the window. One glance outside told him it wasn't just him this time. No porch lights. No distant street lamps. The whole block was out. He slipped on his sandals and stepped outside. The silence was heavier now, as if the entire street was holding its breath. A few neighbors poked their heads out of doors. The Johnsons across the street flicked on a battery-powered lantern. A man in flannel pajamas stepped onto his lawn, rubbing his eyes and muttering something about every damn month. Marcus walked around to the back, where his own utility box was mounted. It was still open. The cable inside looked like it had been torn, not cleanly, but forcefully, messily. There was a faint burnt smell in the air, acrid and synthetic, like scorched plastic. He didn't touch it. Instead, he stood still, staring at it, the flashlight in his hand trembling slightly now, not from fear, but from restrained anger. Across the yard, something rustled in the bushes. He turned his light toward it, but whatever, or whoever it was had already gone. The power company arrived just after 1 a.m. A white utility van rumbled down the street, followed by a smaller truck with 2 technicians. By then, a half-dozen neighbors were gathered in lawn chairs and folding stools, chatting quietly, speculating. Some thought it was a blown transformer. Others blamed a recent heatwave. One elderly man blamed kids these days and their YouTube stunts. Marcus stood back from the crowd, arms crossed, watching as the technicians opened the utility boxes and followed the lines. It didn't take them long to find the damage. One of the workers gestured Marcus over. "Someone messed with this," he said, pointing with his flashlight. "Looks like a manual cut. Not clean either." They went through a main feed, fried the fuse and tripped half the street. Marcus exhaled slowly. "Any idea how long to fix it?" The man rubbed his chin. 2, maybe 3 hours. Gotta bypass the section and rerun a fuse line. You weren't the only one affected. Marcus nodded. Figured. Thing is, the guy added, lowering his voice slightly, this kind of damage isn't random. Either someone was playing stupid, or you've got a neighbor who thinks they know what they're doing. That last sentence stuck with Marcus long after he went back inside. It was almost 4 a.m. by the time power returned. Devices beeped. Lights clicked back on. Air conditioners coughed to life. He sat down at the kitchen table, opened his phone, and rewound the security footage from earlier in the night. There she was again. Grainy, backlit, but unmistakable. The posture. The walk. The limp on her left leg as she turned to run, likely from the rose trellis she took out. Her face never fully showed, but it didn't have to. He leaned back in his chair, lips pressed into a tight line. This wasn't an accident. And it wasn't going away on its own. The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with conversation. Everyone had questions. A few theories were floated. One guy insisted squirrels chewed through something. Another claimed he saw sparks near a transformer box. Karen, however, said nothing. She was out watering her plants at 7 a.m., as if she hadn't tripped a neighborhood blackout mere hours earlier. She waved at everyone, smiling broadly. Her left pant leg had a fresh tear near the shin. Marcus, stepping out to grab the paper from his porch, met her gaze. "Crazy night, huh?" she called across the street. He didn't respond. She tilted her head, letting the silence drag out. "Wonder what happened. Could be one of those rolling blackouts they warned about on the news." He nodded once, slowly, and turned back toward his door. Something had shifted now. It wasn't just annoyance or suspicion. It was a quiet certainty. A line had been crossed, and no amount of fake smiles or garden gnomes could walk it back. He didn't want revenge. He didn't need drama. But he also wasn't going to pretend anymore. This neighborhood wasn't what he expected when he moved in, and neither was Karen. And whatever came next, he was done playing polite. By the following morning, the street was humming with quiet unrest. It wasn't just about the blackout anymore. It was the feeling that something intentional had happened, and that someone in their neat little row of homes had done it. Marcus noticed the change as soon as he stepped outside. Neighbors who usually offered casual waves were now lingering by their mailboxes, comparing notes. A couple of dads from up the block huddled around a coffee thermos, talking in hushed tones about the cut line theory the utility worker mentioned. Mrs. Alvarez from 2 doors down muttered about the meat in her freezer thawing out. Everyone had something to say, except Karen. She was watering her front lawn again, slower this time, like she wanted to be seen not just as innocent but as wholly unaware. Her left shin was bandaged beneath her capris. When Marcus glanced her way, she looked up and gave him a small, almost challenging smile. It didn't last long. Later that day, a white sedan with the City Energy logo pulled up to inspect the work done the night before. A man in a polo and clipboard stepped out and knocked on Marcus's door. They spoke briefly, confirming his outage, time of the cut, and when the repair crew arrived. Marcus asked if the incident had been reported formally. Definitely. Any time there's suspected tampering with utility equipment, we flag it. There'll be a written report. The man glanced around the front lawn. Was there any construction or yard work nearby? Marcus paused. No. Nothing like that. Anyone seen near the box before the outage? A beat passed. Marcus looked across the street. Karen had just come out to collect her mail. She looked up. Their eyes met again. He turned back to the inspector. I have security footage. It's not perfectly clear, but you might want to look at it. They went inside. Marcus played the clip, the flashlight beam, the crouched figure, the glint of scissors. The inspector leaned in, squinting. You know who that is? I've got a good guess, Marcus said, voice steady. I can't prove it, yet, but I know. The man took notes, asked for a copy, and said someone from the legal department might follow up. Marcus handed over the file without a word. He didn't expect much from the city, but having it documented mattered. That evening, things got stranger. The HOA sent out a notice for an emergency neighborhood discussion scheduled for Saturday morning. It was vague, citing only a safety-related concern regarding property damage. Everyone knew what it was about. And somehow, despite no official names being mentioned, a quiet suspicion began spreading. Neighbors speculated in pairs and trios. Some thought it was teens messing around. Others were less sure. Mr. Patterson, who lived next to Marcus, leaned over the fence and said, "Look, I don't want to make assumptions, but Sharon's been acting a little twitchy. You didn't hear this from me, all right?" Marcus didn't confirm or deny anything. He just nodded. Saturday came fast. A folding table was set up near the community center lot. A half-circle of chairs filled up quickly. The HOA board sat stiffly at the front, 3 people trying to look neutral while clearly hoping someone else would speak first. Karen was there, of course, dressed in a blazer far too formal for the occasion, with sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Her arms were crossed, and her expression was a mixture of offense and composure, like she'd already decided she was the victim. When the meeting began, the HOA president, a soft-spoken man named Gerald, cleared his throat. We're here to discuss a serious issue. As many of you know, our street experienced a power outage on Thursday night that affected multiple homes. The utility company's report suggests the cause was intentional tampering with equipment. A quiet murmur passed through the group. The city is investigating, but we wanted to address it here because the box was on private property, specifically, Mr. Whitaker's. All eyes turned to Marcus. He nodded once, calmly. Karen's posture didn't change, but her foot tapped lightly. Gerald continued. Mr. Whitaker has reviewed footage from that night which, while not perfectly identifying, strongly suggests a person entered his yard and tampered with the connection. Marcus stood. I'm not here to accuse anyone without full proof. But I want to make it clear, whoever did this not only caused damage to my property but took out the power for almost 24 homes. It could have hurt someone. It was reckless. A few neighbors nodded. Mrs. Alvarez muttered something under her breath that ended with, "idiots." From the back, someone said, "So are the police involved?" Gerald answered, "The utility company will file a formal report if they deem it criminal. For now, we're asking if anyone has relevant information." A long silence followed. Then Karen stood up. Her voice, when it came, was calm but tight. I find it interesting that fingers are being pointed without clear evidence. It's dangerous to assume guilt based on shadows and assumptions. I was home all night, and I didn't see or hear anything suspicious. Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. Another neighbor spoke up, an older man named Tom. Well, Sharon, my wife said she saw someone moving near the bushes that night. Said it looked like a woman. Had a flashlight. Karen's face didn't flinch, but her hand closed tightly over the chair. I water my plants with a flashlight sometimes. That doesn't make me a saboteur. Tom raised his eyebrows. At midnight? She said nothing. Marcus let it hang in the air. There was no point pressing her, everyone heard it. Saw it. The signs were stacking, and the more she talked, the more brittle her version sounded. By the end of the meeting, the board voted unanimously to have the HOA formally cooperate with any city inquiries. They also passed a motion to install basic surveillance signage at key spots around the neighborhood, hoping it would discourage accidental trespassing. The vote concluded, the chairs were packed away, and people slowly filtered back to their homes. Karen left quickly, avoiding eye contact. Later that evening, as Marcus brought in his trash bins, he noticed something left on his porch, an unmarked envelope. Inside was a single note, written in all caps. Watch who you accuse. No signature. No explanation. He read it twice, then slipped it into a drawer. He didn't feel fear, just a deeper, colder kind of resolve. He installed 2 more cameras the next morning. Not to catch someone again, but to ensure if they tried, there'd be no doubt next time. Karen, meanwhile, was now fighting her own quiet battle. Word had spread. A few neighbors had stopped waving. Someone ignored her cheerful, "good morning," on her walk. Her daughter, apparently embarrassed, had started spending more nights at a friend's house. For someone who thrived on the illusion of control, it was a slow unraveling. Marcus, for his part, went back to work. The days felt calmer, even if the undercurrent remained. He knew she wasn't done. Not yet. People like Karen didn't walk away. They doubled down. But he was ready. This time, if she came back, it wouldn't be a question of suspicion. It would be proof. And when that happened, there'd be no denying it. The days that followed were unusually quiet. There were no confrontations, no HOA notices, no passive-aggressive comments disguised as neighborly concern. Karen stopped lingering outside. She watered her plants early, before sunrise, and collected her mail after dark. Whatever pride she'd walked around with before had folded into something smaller, something wary. She had become, for the first time since Marcus moved in, silent. Marcus kept to his routine, but he noticed the shift. There were fewer cars parked in front of her house, and her husband, rarely home to begin with, was seen even less. The blinds stayed drawn, the porch light remained off. But what Karen didn't know was that Marcus hadn't let the matter go. He had filed a report with the utility company, submitted his footage formally, and forwarded the copy to the HOA board, just for documentation. He wasn't looking to stir anything up, he just wanted it on record. If something else happened, it wouldn't be a mystery. It would be a pattern. A week later, a letter arrived from the city's infrastructure department. Karen had been issued a citation for interference with public utilities. The fine wasn't small. Marcus only found out because Gerald from the HOA stopped him one morning while he was mowing his lawn. She appealed it, Gerald said, sipping from a to-go coffee cup. Claimed she was doing yard maintenance and mistook the junction box for her own irrigation system. Said it was poorly labeled. Marcus raised an eyebrow. At midnight? Gerald gave a tired shrug. City didn't buy it either. They're letting the fine stand. HOA's adding their own, something about unauthorized access to a neighbor's property. It wasn't jail time. It wasn't public humiliation. But it was something. Accountability, even if modest. Karen didn't respond publicly. But her yard started to wither. The flower beds she'd once groomed obsessively now looked patchy. The porch steps hadn't been swept in days. Something had cracked, and it showed in the smallest details. Marcus didn't feel triumphant. He hadn't wanted to win. He had wanted her to stop. To recognize that her fear masquerading as authority had consequences. Maybe now, she would. But the final turn came quietly, and unexpectedly. It was early Saturday when Marcus heard a knock at his door. Not loud. Not rushed. Just, tentative. He opened it to find Karen standing there, alone, holding something in her hand. She looked older than usual. The confidence she once wore like armor had faded, replaced with a kind of worn-out stiffness. She wasn't holding herself the same way, shoulders hunched slightly, arms drawn in. The item in her hand was a manila envelope. "I wanted to give you this," she said quietly. "To return." Marcus stared at it. "What is it?" She held it out. "I think it's yours." He took it slowly, opened the flap, and saw inside a pair of garden shears, cleaned, but unmistakably the same brand and size as the ones that had cut through the cable. His mouth remained closed, unreadable. "I don't know what I was thinking," she said. "That night. I thought I was fixing something. I convinced myself you were doing something wrong. And when everything went dark, I panicked. I didn't mean for it to go that far." Marcus said nothing. The shears felt heavier in his hand than they looked. "I know this doesn't undo anything," she continued, her voice still low. "But I wanted to stop pretending. I needed to say something." He looked at her for a long moment. Not angry. Not smug. Just searching. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She didn't even seem sure why she was there. Maybe guilt, maybe exhaustion. Maybe she finally realized she was no one's enforcer. Just another neighbor on a street full of people trying to live quietly. He nodded once. "All right." She hesitated, then nodded back. Without another word, she turned and walked away. He closed the door, placed the envelope on the counter, and stood there for a while. Later that day, he tossed the shears in the garbage and covered them with a bag of coffee grounds and eggshells. He didn't need to keep them. That part was over. In the weeks that followed, Karen remained quiet. She no longer marched up and down the street. She stopped correcting garbage bin placement. Her house remained lived in but subdued. Some neighbors still gave her side glances, others stopped engaging entirely. No one forgot, but things settled into a new rhythm. As for Marcus, he installed one more camera, not because he feared her, but because peace wasn't something he was willing to leave unguarded anymore. He got back to work. The lost client meeting was rescheduled, and this time, uninterrupted. It went well, better than expected. He joked during the presentation about weathering a power outage at the worst possible time, and everyone laughed. No one needed the full story. He kept his lawn trimmed, fixed the back fence, and even helped the neighbor kid with a bike tire one afternoon. Normal returned. Slowly, but surely. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the crickets started their rhythm, Marcus sat on his porch with a cold drink in hand. The air was warm, the breeze light. He looked across the street. Karen's lights were on. Faint silhouettes moved behind the curtains. The same house. The same neighbor. But something fundamental had changed. He didn't feel watched anymore. Didn't feel like he had to perform or defend himself. And that was enough. Not revenge. Not satisfaction. Just quiet. Finally.